Good morning. This is Adam Davis in the State 4-H office, and this morning we're going to be doing our Tricks of the Trade webinar on the enrollment analysis tools created by Robbie Neff. Robbie's done quite a bit of work with the data from a macro perspective where we can look at larger trends, county by county, comparing districts, comparing counties, as well as statewide analysis of both group enrollments and as well as individual member enrollments and things like retention. And I'll ask Robbie just give a few minutes on his background because he does have an interesting way he got into this whole cubic slab. So here's Robbie now.
Thanks, Adam. I started off as a student working for Cornell Cooperative Extension on an internship through Professor Hamilton in Human Development and through Angela Northern in Erie County. And we started off pretty much manually tracking and using administrative data in the western districts to look at the things that you mentioned already, like retention and overall trends. And as I did that, I took a spreadsheet modeling class at Cornell and realized that everything that I was doing for one county or 5 counties could easily be applied to the whole state's program at no extra work. So I ended up creating these tools that are interactive that give the ability of educators to go in and to get the data that they want and the insights that they want instead of having them, make their own analysis. It gives them the ability to extract the insights right away. So we'll get started here. The purpose of these enrollment analysis tools, number one is to get insights and trends into your program. If your program's small, you may have a good idea of shifts from year to year, but you might not have a way of objectively assessing, how good your program is doing each year. And if those trends continue, if, say, one year you have a very strong growth in female enrollment, but then it dies off the next year, those are things that you can see from these tools. Another way that educators have been able to use it, I've worked with a lot of the Common Measures and Healthy Living survey data, and it's a really good way to go back when you're applying for grant applications and to have objective ways to assess how well your program performed. And then this data that we use, it's already accessible. It's the data that goes into the calculations of the ES-237. And if it's already there, it's very, very easy for us to go in and to look at it and to get some objective numbers. We've also had people use it sort of to just explore. You'll see as we start playing around that there's a lot of options. There's over 100,000 different possibilities of graphs that you can chart using these tools. So you never know what you're going to find in terms of something that might strike you as interesting. Sometimes after exploring around the tool, you may say, "Oh, this doesn't seem right," and that's actually good because that means we need to strengthen our data reporting processes. And as we continue to use these tools, the data reporting is going to get even better. And then the last reason would be from an opportunity analysis perspective. You can look at how other counties have been able to reach a certain demographic, let's say non-white youth, for example, what programs they've used, if it's what delivery modes, say it's after school using 4-H curricula, say it's environmental science, geared, things like that are really easy to find in this tool. So right now, if you just look at graphing certain statistics on the ES-237, these are some of the findings you'll get. We reach the most youth in terms of raw numbers in special interest short-term and school enrichment programs. Next in line is organized 4-H clubs. The organized 4-H clubs are a lot more intensive in terms of the involvement of the members that are in those clubs, whereas the school enrichment and short-term programs could last, less than 6 hours. You can also see from the 237 just a simple composition. It's pretty close to 50-50 by gender. In terms of residence type, it tends to be geared towards towns and cities in between 10,000 and 50,000, or towns less than 10,000. And ethnicity, we reach about 80% non-Hispanic, 20% Hispanic, and then 84% white, and 10% Black or African American. So these are some things that, just if you graph them in the first place instead of looking at the raw numbers on a report, you can start to see a little bit better composition. But what if we want to look into more specific trends that are geared maybe towards a specific county? And that's why I've created this tool. So I'll let Adam explain the difference between the data enrollment tool and the group enrollment tool.
Just to be clear, that for the individual study and the other delivery modes that are on the ES-237, the criteria to be reported on the ES-237 is that they're over 6 hours. So if it's on the ES-237, it's an over 6-hour program. 4-H records data in two different ways. One is a group enrollment. The group enrollment are youth that will come to possibly a one-day program. I like the example of a bike rodeo, where we don't enroll the youth, we don't collect their address, their photo release, things like that. But we do attempt to collect their race, gender, ethnicity, grade, and we put them into a group. So we're tracking what the demographics of the group that we've reached. We're just not getting their names, basically. Somebody from National 4-H Council called it counting heads once, and I think that's a good example. However, the individual enrollments are usually club members. We do get a full array of forms on them. We do have a lot more information on them, and you'll see those in the club numbers.
All right, so the introduction to this tool shows you where the data comes from. In this case, the data comes from the years 2009 to 2014, extracted out of Access 4-H Online. Now that we've switched to 4-H Online, we're going to have to merge the databases in future years as we continue to use this tool and update the data. But if you're wondering, if 2008, 2009 program year, that would be the later year. So if it's 2008, 2009, it'd be classified under 2009 in this tool. So after you go through the introduction, you have this little menu that breaks it down in terms of what you want to look at. You can either look at members or volunteers, and within each one you can look at enrollment or re-enrollment. Re-enrollment refers to retention rates. We'll get to that in a second, but let's start out with looking at a simple breakdown by gender. Right now, we use this from a comparison perspective. So up here, you can make a selection of a state or a district. It's a simple drop-down. And then on the other side, you can select from the state, the district, or any specific county. We do not allow county-to-county comparison, mostly because we don't want people looking too far into the data. A lot of times when you get down to the county level, the sample sizes are pretty small, especially for tracking certain demographics, say like, non-white members in a 200-member program. You don't want one member dropping out of that year to sway the retention by 50% or something like that. But right now we have statewide in the Western District. You can change the year, and up here the graphs will change, and same thing over here. In this case, the sample sizes are pretty big, so the percentage won't change significantly, but the numbers will from year to year. As you can see down here, you can see the trends from 2009 to 2010. That was the second year that we were in Access 4-H, and we believe that on that year, a little bit of data cleaning occurred that took out members that weren't active in the database. So that's what we can attribute to this large jump. But everything else we believe is pretty accurate, and you can see that overall both male and female experienced a small decrease over the last 5 years. In the case of Western, they had a pretty big jump in female enrollment in 2011, and then went down in subsequent years. So if we were to change this from Western to, let's say, Wyoming County, You can see on the bottom that it'll take a second to process. There's about 1,000 calculations in the back end, so it takes, give or take, 10 seconds depending on the processing power of your computer. And once it does, the graphs automatically change. Now we're looking at only Wyoming data, as you can see by the axis. And you can see the trends in, just Wyoming County now and compare it to the state. Or if you wanted to go back to Western District, now you can compare the county to the district that it belongs to. So you can look at gender for grade level, for example. We break it down by Clover Buds, elementary school, middle, high school. The actual breakdown in terms of what we classify each grade as can be found right here. And then we regress each grade for each year along this curve. The reason we regress it is because overall your program is going to have a shape to it where it peaks and then dips, and that's the point where you start getting less new members for every member that is dropping out of the program. And overall that we found that these regressions were pretty accurate, usually, especially for statewide or within the districts. The R-squared value, the correlation is over 0.75, which is very high. It's only out of 1. So this gives you a pretty good idea of the size and shape of your program. You can see, for example, statewide that 2009's was very, very high, and then it starts dipping down. 2010 is this gray one here, but you can see that in each grade level, it went down. It wasn't just one grade level that experienced that huge jump. And then if we were to go to a different county, I'm from Erie County, so let's choose that one. Once again, give it about 10 seconds to make the switch. And now you can see how Erie County's program versus the state's program, now it starts peaking at around 7th grade instead of the statewide programs actually peak, if you look at them as a whole, in 5th or 6th. So that's really good. That, that means that members are staying in for a longer period. You continue to have program growth before, other activities are taking over 4-H life in a few members. So that's some of the findings that you can draw from graphs like this. You can also do the same for, you can look at residence type. In this case, in Erie County, you have town/city 10K to 50K starting out on top, and then over the last 5 years, actually town and non-farm less than 10K have taken over as the most popular residence type that's reported. And then statewide, town and non-farm less than 10K definitely dominates as well, so that seems to make sense. The really good part about this data enrollment tool, in my opinion, is the ability to track retention. We'll start off with grade level, but if you look here, retention we define as, in terms of the actual percentage calculation, the denominator is the number of youth who could come back in the following year, and the numerator is the number that actually did come back. So let's say in 2010 program, there were 100 youth members, right? In 2011, if 75 of those came back, then you'd have a 75% retention rate. So if you look at statewide, right here, you can see that overall returning members, these are members that have been in the program for at least 1 year, they have a really consistent re-enrollment rate across all grade levels. But if you look at new member retention rate, these are members that it's their first year and we're tracking if they're coming back the next year. It actually gets much lower as the years go on. So it goes from 60% in the Clover Bud range all the way down to 37% in the high school range. And maybe 2013 overall was a bad year for retention. As you see for 2012, now Clover Bud is at 56 and high school is at 45, which narrows the gap a little bit. But overall, these findings have been pretty consistent in terms of in terms of retention getting harder as the years go on. And you can see there's an all years average graph on the bottom. So this looks at statewide, and it has very large sample sizes. As soon as you look at these retention rates based on the county, you can see that the sample sizes are very small, and we hope that you take them for what they are. If there's only 17 new members and it's got a 47% retention rate, that means one member can sway that retention rate as much as 5 to 6% overall. So just be careful in terms of not extracting too many conclusions out of one number. Keep in mind sample sizes, and if members are grouped into one club and that club folds, for example, then it could heavily sway in terms of county rates. So all of these things that we can do for members, we can also do for volunteers. This is still a member graph, but it's another strong conclusion that we've drawn. White members versus non-white members, we have had much more consistent retention in returning white members versus non-white members. You can see that returning non-white over the state, there were 449 that could have returned and only 45% retention. So that means, roughly 200 to 250 actually did return. And whereas returning white members have a huge gap between returning and new, the non-white members don't have that same gap. It does change a little bit year to year, so 2013 seemed to be a bad year, but there still is this consistent gap that white members have an easier time assimilating into the 4-H program, and the same is true for counties typically. In Erie County, for example, we only had 4 non-white members that could have come back and only 1 did, so retention is 25%. That's an example of, where 3 members just swayed that number by 75%. So everything, like I said, that was done for members, you can do for volunteers. You can look at the same breakdowns. These numbers shift a lot more year to year. You can go back and compare. We encourage you to compare how your volunteers are shifting versus how your members are shifting. If there's some correlation, perhaps volunteers, if volunteers have a decrease, then the year after members have a large decrease. That might be something that occurs. They might be completely correlated where they happen in the same year, or they might not be correlated at all. These are things that you can find on our graph. And it does look into retention for volunteers as well, but due to sample size, we do not allow the retention rates to be compared by ethnicity and race. There's just not enough members at anything besides the state level, so we didn't want to confuse people with numbers that are swayed by even 1 volunteer, let alone 2 or 3. So there's the member enrollment tool. Now we're going to shift to the group enrollment tool, which analyzes everything by delivery mode. So these numbers are pretty close to the ES237, but they may not be perfectly reflected, and that's because the way that the data extracts from Access 4-H, it isn't, some of the members might be counted twice based on the programs that they're involved and things like that. But you have your selection boxes, just like you did on the other tool. Right now we're looking at the statewide program, and you can see in 2014 that school enrichment and special interest dominated, and then organized clubs. That was consistent with the report that I showed right in the beginning that was extracted directly from the ES237. But down here, you have a breakdown of the actual numbers. Overall, if you wanted to look at percentages, so that right now it's breaking down participants by gender. If you wanted to look at actual percentages, you can switch to the percentage graph and see that in almost every delivery mode, it's pretty close to 50-50. The most in terms of not 50-50 is camping programs, which have 57-58% females and 42-43% males. and then you can switch year to year and see how things shift. So if we start in 2010, school enrichment programs dominated compared to special interest. However, in 2011, special interest actually took over. Maybe that's because a large grant came in that, encouraged certain members to be classified this way versus another way. It's open to interpretation, and as educators, you may have a good idea of why the number reported or the reporting shifted. And then you can see year to year. You can also look at this breakdown based on ethnicity and race. So each breakdown can be switched back to percentage. If you're looking at race for 2014, the most members that we reached through non-white, the most non-white members that we reached was through the after-school programs using 4-H curricula. It looks like we reached about 34% members, and one of the reasons why that we've discovered is because New York City's efforts shift that number by a lot. So if you look at New York City in 2014, in this delivery mode, they reached 2,400 non-white participants, and then in special interest short-term, they reached 4,000 non-white participants. And New York City has the ability to do this in any given year. If you wanted to look at volunteers from, let's look at the Western District. In 2014, most of the volunteers were reported as organized clubs. If we switch into Capital, we find that a lot of the volunteers were in school enrichment programs, and the possibilities go on and on. What we find probably the most beneficial besides the breakdown is if you click into the delivery mode, you can select a specific one for this. Let's select school enrichment programs, and you see the breakdown by grade level. I'll zoom in a little bit just in case. But as you select, you can see that enrollment peaks in 2nd grade. The most popular way to reach this, or the most popular program that is offered in the school enrichment is the Ag in the Classroom. And Ag in the Classroom focuses a lot on 2nd graders. The school enrichment programs are targeting small and large towns mainly, a little bit farm, not so much suburb and city, and then a lot of white members compared to non-white members. But if we switch into the after-school program, you can see that the black enrollment is much higher proportionally to the white enrollment. All of a sudden we're reaching 42% city folks, and then this curve shifts from peaking in 2nd grade to peaking in 4th grade. The way that they're being offered this program is through technology and engineering, and we can look at these within each county. A lot of times the graphs might be blank if you're selecting something, and that's just because there's so many possibilities that your county's not going to offer every single delivery mode every single year under every single subject. If we wanted to switch into the subject, you can select now based on the program, and let's say you're wondering, okay, how can I reach the most older members? And you click into leadership and personal development, that grade level distribution shifts to peaking in 7th or 8th grade versus the typical 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. The main way that this is being offered is through 4-H overnight camping programs, pretty close second with special interest short-term programs. It's reaching a lot of large town folks, things like that. You can switch into community/volunteer service. That one seems to be a little bit bimodal in terms of peaking in the early years, going down, and then peaking in post-high school or other. You can shift from year to year and see if those are consistent. In this case, it's actually pretty all over the place. The members in these grade levels change from peaking in 1st and 2nd grade to peaking in 12th grade. That could be grant money. It could be a lot of things. when I said earlier that this can be used as an exploratory asset to your county, this is one of the things I mean, where you have all these graphs in front of you, you're switching around, you're playing with it, and, if it's your county specifically, you can say, hey, this is why our enrollment shifted to later or earlier years. And if you don't know why, that's okay also. It's just great to be aware of these kind of things. An example of something with earlier years, peak, let's try food and nutrition, for example, peaks in the 2nd or 3rd grade. Technology or engineering peaks closer to middle school. So there's a lot of opportunities. I encourage you to play around with these tools. They're accessible on the web, and I'll have Adam at the end tell exactly where. But these are the 2 tools that we have. You can analyze member and group enrollment. Some of the findings that we've been able to find that you won't find on the tool, but these are just aggregate findings from year to year. One of the biggest conclusions we had is retention by grade level. This is from the years 2011 to 2013, so we have a very good sample size. Returning member retention stays consistently at 70%, yet new member retention starts at about 60% in 1st grade, and by 11th grade, it dips down below 40%. So that's a really, really important finding in terms of if you are, if you have all these marketing efforts that are geared towards recruiting older members, all of a sudden, if only 40% are coming, that makes your marketing, or coming back, that makes your marketing efforts half as effective. And it doesn't mean your marketing efforts shouldn't continue. It just means that maybe there should be more of an emphasis on assimilating the older members into the 4-H culture. Here's another really important graph. This is retention rate, where within each box, that is the 25th and 75th quartile of, if I were to plot each county's retention rate for returning overall and new year to year, then you have this median retention rate, right? You have 50-plus counties, so there's a happy middle area, and this is consistent year to year. You have 70% retention rate, 2011, 12, and 13 as the median. In some years, the interquartile range, which is the difference between quarter 3 and quarter 1, is much smaller. That means that retention, there were less differences among counties. And as you can see, for new members, the interquartile range gets much larger. That means that new member retention rate is a lot more inconsistent. In some counties, it could be 80% one year, where in others it could be 25%. We did remove outliers in this case, but the new retention rate is also pretty consistent at about 50% in all of these years. So some key points to summarize from this presentation. The #1 objective, in my opinion, from looking at all this data, should be to narrow the gap between the new and returning member retention rates. Basically, it allows your new members that you get into this program to actually contribute to program growth instead of just staying stagnant at the current levels of enrollment. And this first year is so crucial for retention. Becomes way more important as they become older and have more distractions, whether it's technology, sports clubs, school clubs, things like that. And another really important point is that this analysis not only allows for insights into the current trends, but also for the improvement of the data reporting processes that we use in the future. As we continue to get more accurate and reliable information, these statistics are going to be even more insightful and even more meaningful. My company that I created to do these analyses is called Cubics Labs LLC. I encourage you to visit cubicsinsights.com. Our focus is offering cost-effective data analysis solutions for small businesses and nonprofit organizations. These are tools that are created entirely on Microsoft Excel, and the reason that we do that is because it's much less work-intensive and we can offer it at a really fair price. But we do try to simulate that website feel and put the user in control of the data. so that you don't have to do the analysis, you just have to interact with all the possibilities of the analysis. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Robbie. I just want to mention that if you're watching this presentation, you probably realize that the Access 4-H system has been decommissioned. So this data that we have, it's what we have for now. I noticed as Robbie was talking about group enrollments that there was a pretty decent number of group enrollments that were in the organized club category. Access 4-H, the default delivery method was clubs, and of course we know that that's not terribly accurate, but as we move to 4-H Online, the group enrollments are the individual study, and the default is a more accurate picture of how group enrollments work. So it's just a good idea to, when you're looking at your data, to realize it's just reflecting that's what was entered into the system. I'm pretty confident that 4-H Online going forward will give us some more accurate reporting. Robbie just told me that we're working on an online portion of 4-H Online that will give us some of these types of results without having to create the difficult reports that I go through on a weekly basis for folks. So this is all very exciting. And if you're looking for these tools, please contact me. My email address is afd7. And we'll look forward to seeing you on our next 4-H Tricks of the Trade webinar. Thanks, everyone.